Hi everyone.
Hi everyone.
What we have for you today is another in our series on the Anima and Animus, and this one is the divided anima, heaven or hell. Or is it both?
It's both.
It's both. Oh dear, thank you. But you speak from experience, do you?
I think I probably do.
What with me?
Present company exempt, I think.
Oh good,
Yeah.
good. Right. Seriously, there's a lot in this one, and we really hope you enjoy it. And
Yes.
thanks to our student Mladen, who's great, who takes part in it with us.
Yeah.
So with loads more coming, loads more. But this is the one for today. So see you all.
See you soon. Thank
Take
you.
care. Right, so here we have it then. This is the scene from the card. And what we have, of course, is a contemporary street at night with bars and clubs. And it's the image of a man. We can only see the back of him here. So we have his perspective through the back of him. So metaphorically, we can say that it's like a privileged perspective from his unconscious. So we can see how the feminine elements are clustered around him dynamically before he enters into this field of potential relationships, which is the bars and the clubs at night. So the first thing to notice is the older woman on the right, which represents his mother, but not only externally, but internally, how he's incorporated her influence over him during his development. And then on the outside, we have a dark-haired woman on the left and a blonde-haired woman on the right. And of course, the title of this video is the divided anima, heaven or hell. So very often when young men go out into the world in order to build a life for themselves and to meet people, meet women in this instance, then he's going to meet different women with different configurations of relating that he either can connect with or can't, based on his experience, his normal, conscious, and intentional experience, but also it will be filtered. And the emphasis we're making here, because we're calling it the divided anima, is the influence of the mother on the inside. And there are other factors as well with respect to the women, aren't there? Because women receive a man as he is configured. And the role of the mother in that man's life is important, isn't it?
Yes. Well, he's basically taken his mother on a night out, but on the inside.
Yeah.
Obviously the card is presented in the way that it is to make the point, to make that he is literally taking his inner mother with him. And there are these two women that it seems that he's encountered within the street scene. And I would suspect that it's probably heaven and hell for him, actually, but it's probably more towards heaven than hell. And I would suggest that it's probably hell for the two young women who are there, because if he is to further either of those two relationships in a real sense, then one of those women, or both maybe, will have to share him with his mother.
Yeah.
And that kind of triangulation, if you like, will then go with him. It will go with them. It will go with the young women as well.
Yeah.
So it's a complex situation, literally, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not unresolvable, but
no.
but there's a lot of dynamics
It's
involved.
Yeah, it's a primal one.
Yes.
And it's collective as well.
Yeah.
Albeit that it's in a roughly contemporary scene. This could be any big city in the world. But we also need to consider that those two women, the dark-haired young woman, the blonde-haired young woman, are also external reference for the projection of his anima onto.
Yeah.
So there's an element of reality testing here. The when young men go out into the world and they take their inner mother with them as a representative of their anima, specifically in this instance, we could say the mother complex, then the mother complex is a third party before the relationship gets underway.
Yeah.
And the quality of the relationship to the mother will determine very much what kind of judgments he makes about which of those two women he might want to be with.
Yes.
So the two of them there are divided because they represent the potential for a split. But the one we need to understand is the mother, because you've got basically the judgments of Paris here enacted out psychologically. from the Trojan myth of the shepherd prince of Troy, Paris, where he has to give the apple to the most beautiful woman. Now, we can think of beauty as being an external thing. So a young man thinking that he's looking for someone to have some kind of relationship with might believe that he's looking for a woman for that purpose. But the presence of the mother imago on the inside will determine, as I say, whether he's free enough to make a proper choice, or whether he actually retains his capacity to relate from the outside and redirects us on the inside. So he's still basically giving the apple to the mother. So from the man's perspective, that young man's perspective, that's the primary unconscious issue for him that will get in the way of him making a choice about what kind of woman he's going to relate to. Now, if we take, for example, just on the basis of simplicity, that the dark-haired woman represents hell and the blonde-haired woman represents heaven. And no offense against dark-haired women, by the way. It's just for illustrative purposes. Then if he makes the wrong choice because of the effect of his mother complex and goes for the wrong kind of woman, then that will be probably because of either a direct resistance to his experience of his mother and the formation of his anima through his mother, or it'll be because his instincts are trying to move him away from his own attachment to the mother rather than the mother's attachment to him. So as we say, it gets really, really complicated. If he makes the wrong choice, it's heaven or hell. And his anima, if it's divided, will mean that he can't make a distinction based on reality, because he will always be referring to the inner representation. Likewise with the woman on the right. Would she want him if he's still attached to his mother, if he's still moving away on the inside towards her? Will she be able to trust him? Because young men who are overly attached to their mothers, if their eroticism isn't turned inwardly, it can come out in the form of promiscuity, an inability to relate fully to a woman. So he's likely to want to relate to many women in a superficial way. So heaven or hell beckons, as we can see in this universal collective representation here. And it all depends on the state of his anima, as Jungians understand that to be. So what do you think then with respect to that, Mladen? I'll just unmute you.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. The last part especially was a bit interesting and unfamiliar to me, honestly. How you said that if he doesn't manage the eroticism, it can turn into promiscuity.
Yeah.
Could you please go along with that just a little bit more, how the etiology of that would constellate?
Yeah. So psychodynamics are always layered and they're always superpositioned. That gives it its complexity. And the reason we say, for example, by their libido shall ye know them, that basically means that how their life force, not just their sexuality, but their life force is delivered into the world, tells us pretty much what we would need to know about the configuration of anyone on the inside. So if somebody is overly attached to the mother, that might mean in a depth psychology sense that they can't betray that image by relating in depth and in a complete way to an outer woman. So there'll be no in-depth relating, but there might well be promiscuity, because then he can objectify women on the outside whilst holding his mother up as some kind of inner ideal that he can't betray. So in that sense, such men will either usually at a push from instincts, respond to the instincts by becoming promiscuous externally, or not relate externally at all, find it very, very difficult, because the image of the mother on the inside is so overwhelmingly powerful that he can't detach from that to relate at all. So he'll be fumbling, he'll be difficult, he won't know what to do, he will look awkward. Now, for the dark-haired woman who represents metaphorical hell in this regard, this young man under such conditions would have victim written all over him, and she might then want to exploit him in that way. If the blonde-haired woman, for the sake of the illustration here, represents potential heaven, then she would know immediately that the mother is a problem. She would believe probably at first externally, but really the source of that is the internal representation of the mother, even though they are superpositioned. So that would mean that the better intentioned young woman who might want a good relationship with him, perhaps a lifelong one, who knows, would have to come up against that force which is constellated in him on the inside. So then the blonde-haired woman, the young woman, would see the man as a victim to his mother's influence on the inside, whereas the dark-haired woman would say, oh no, you're going to be a victim to me. I can bully you, I can dominate you, I can break the connection with your mother in case there's anything positive in there that would prevent me from exploiting you.
Yeah, and of course, really, the ideal role of the mother here should be, you talked about the judgment of Paris earlier, Steve. The role of the mother, given her age and so on, and her time of life, should be one of wisdom. I mean, he should be able to carry the imago of his mother, if he's had a good relationship to her, of course, around inside him in that way. That would then, obviously, in an external sense, give him the insight into what is playing out here, both on the inside and potentially on the outside with these two women. But I suspect that she probably represents power more than she represents wisdom in this scenario that we're painting here, and therein lies the problem. Because it's likely, then you asked about the young women, if we were to say or imagine for a moment that they were in fact real outer women, then they would probably enter into some kind of power battle or competitive battle between themselves over the young man. And you know, obviously none of this is ideal. It's not as it should be, but these are real scenarios. These things play out all the time in the way that we're describing. So so much hinges on, as you rightly say, the relationship, the external relationship to her matters less, to the mother that is, than does the internal relationship. And sometimes mothers want their sons to go out and to free them as well, to free them from the attachment so that they can get on with their own lives.
Good point.
And that doesn't always happen. It's all down to how we deal with the imago on the inside, whether it's, you know, it's the young man carrying around the imago of his mother, or the mother carrying around what the animus might represent for her in terms of her relationship to her adult son. So all of these things will be in the mix here in this scenario. And that's why you say it gets incredibly complex or complicated.
Yes, it does. You have to consider each potential scenario, and in an image like this, it kind of sums up the potential for all of them.
It does.
But the ultimate figure that has responsibility for their own life is this young man, and he has to make the choice. Hence, this is like the judgment of Paris. He has to decide which way he's going to go on this. He could potentially be left with the equivalent of Hera or Hera, the mother, the queen of heaven, you know, or he could go with Venus or Aphrodite, or perhaps Athena. You know, which is he going to choose? And he can only give it to one, give the apple to one in the myth. But that, of course, means that he makes an enemy of the other two. Now that story, that metaphor, really puts the requirement back on the choice of the young man in a way that the burden of responsibility is his to deal with whoever he isolates, whatever force, psychological force that he isolates by making a choice. So if he does betray the mother, if the mother's been controlling and powerful, and he gives that over to the equivalent of Venus or Aphrodite, then wisdom might be thrown to the winds along with power as well. And he might get access to the woman, but not have the wisdom or the power to actualize a safe rite of passage for himself through that.
Well, he might get what you were suggesting before, Steve, with respect to a more promiscuous kind of relationship, or a more primitive kind of relating, really, whereby, you know, as the expression goes, one night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury.
Yeah.
And I know that's not a very pleasant thing to think about, but, you know, that can be the end result for some young men who find themselves in these situations.
Yeah. That's the Darwinian element.
It is.
Which once we get below the surface of the mythopoetic representations, that is inescapable. We have to come to terms with the biology, because biology is very, very unforgiving. We can always make a fantasy-based representation in order to ease our way away from consequences of choice that we've either made or not made. But biology is unforgiving once we do make a choice, because, for example, there can be children involved, that kind of thing, that we're pushed by our instincts to bring about, just to bring about the reproduction, almost without regard for the consequences of that at a human level, for the child as well as for the parents. So this is a very tough situation, adaptive situation that all young men are faced with. What do they do with respect to relating, and how conscious or otherwise they are of the anima as a driving force for relatedness is going to be key.
Yeah, a lot of good information there. And a part of what you were saying about how there's a division here between the representations, the anima representations of heaven and hell. I mean, even though it is on a surface level presented as a polarity, the actuality of it is that the man loses in both cases if he is unconscious of the dynamics, and if he is unconscious of the mother's role that is still in this context negatively bearing upon him. So that's very, and as you say, now I understand, because if he doesn't relate properly and under instinctive drive, if we can reduce it to Panksepian drives here without the proper context, and he cannot find it, he cannot establish a proper relationship because of the mother complex, it can go all over the place with many women, or to retreat as a backfire of that sort. So in either case, it doesn't bode well for the young guy in the picture. And even if he chooses the good one, there's a chance that she might not choose him, because she could be aware of the dynamics that are within him and how she could get hurt. So it's not a good starting point at all if he remains in the same position.
Yeah. So consciousness, preparedness, in other words, is the key. And how many young men are prepared by their education or even their parents to understand what this choice is? Because as we come into consciousness socially ourselves, the state of our parents is so important about whether they engage with guiding us or not. And that engagement, should it occur, can be double-edged too, because there's very often a lot of jealousies. There's an awful lot of stuff that can be going on between parents themselves that all gets ducted down into the young man. And the net result can be he's completely unprepared by them, and he may have to go to a peer group in order to get prepared in whatever fashion may be available to him. But these are such important choices, aren't they, for life?
Yes, they are. And I guess for young men, if they have a good mother, in the sense that the mother too understands these dynamics and understands the importance of having her own life, of having her own, having that separation, having her own track, if you like, then, you know, that's a blessing. But we see the pathology, don't we? In our work. This is it. We very rarely do people come in who have a good relationship, and they've managed to navigate these developmental stages positively, and they absolutely don't need to see people like us. But we see the pathology in the raw, and particularly where there is a very possessive mother, a mother who is overly attached to a son. We see some terrible outcomes from that. I know you particularly, Steve. I'm not suggesting that you mention case studies, but you have worked with a number of young men who have been, well, I'll give an example because I think there's enough of a passage of time to be able to say it, but whose mother insisted that her son sleep with him. And that caused terrible problems, terrible amount of suffering. You actually managed to help him and to free him from that. But he was in a terrible state when he first.
I remember the one that you mentioned,
you know
and it's a very long time. It's 35 years ago.
It is a long time ago.
Yeah. Seems like yesterday, but I do know that he's okay now.
Yes.
But that poor guy was on the edge of suicide. There's no doubt about that, and he was a mature man then. But he's not the only case. There are others where the same thing has happened. The mother's actually brought I can think immediately of another two relatively recently, and by that I mean the last 15 years. Without going into any detail or disclosure, where the son had been brought into the marital bed, and the father had been embarrassed out of it, and the son stayed right through adolescence and into early adulthood, and the damage that was done through that was awful. But I guess that's self-explanatory without going into any detail. But everything depends upon the configuration for an individual, and that's why any approach to helping someone has to take that specific context and never really have a general approach, a statistical approach to human beings and the complexity of their suffering. So we need to be able to receive the field of the experience of a person. And you'll know, Mladen, that the way we both work, but I always work this way, is I always start on the periphery of a very wide field. And then it's a case of circling, and the circles get closer and closer. And in going around those circles each time, we're scooping up different things, associations, testing the background before we get to the figure of the individual. And of course, the figure responds to this circular approach, which is beginning to gradually focus in. And the person who's suffering, their complexes respond. You see the defense mechanisms mobilizing, but also the healing factor responds to that slow approach, which is nevertheless going to eventually arrive directly at the core of the problem. And in doing it in that way, you can build and maintain a field of rapport, and you can be updated continually yourself as you're interacting with the field of the other person. So I'm emphasizing that because in personal development, we have to do the same thing with ourselves. That's difficult to do because it's difficult to be objective about ourselves, difficult to see the whole field that is contributed to and has become the through line of our life. If we don't address that, we don't remove it, it is still there. And it's in that narrative, in that trajectory, that every maladaptation that we've ever had remains latent at best, but perhaps also active directly at worst, but outside of our conscious awareness. So when we mentioned, or Pauline mentioned the first case, I know because it's so long ago, and I do know he's okay, and I won't say any more than that. 35 years ago, she saw the effect that I had on me, for example, at that time, as a professional, having to take the responsibility to help that person come through it. Now, one of the very important things that emphasized themselves at that time was the context. It would have been so easy, so easy to be superficial with him. But that wouldn't have helped at all. And it would have been so easy to be emotionally superficial in the way that you generally get with counselors. where you emit the representation of such things as unconditional positive regard, that kind of thing, and empathy. But the important thing to understand when you're working in depth with someone who has really suffered is that they know if you're not being genuine, they feel it. And if you carry on performatively, like an actor, as if you're not really engaged, and all that will do will make everything worse, even though you may appear to be doing all the right things by the book on the surface. And that comes at a cost for you as a therapist, because the act of being genuine, truly genuine, and being field sentient and relational with a person means that, if I can go back to the idea of being an actor, it's like being a method actor at that point, because you have to feel everything they feel, but not in that empathic way. It's a rapport-based way that the true depth of understanding objectively impacts you. And the only way to deal with that is to go back into the collective psyche, because all of this has happened before to other people in other generations, right back across human history and beyond. The same kind of scenario has repeated itself. And deep within all of us, there is a template to receive that experience and appropriately interpret it and act upon it. But these representations are so far removed from normal consciousness that we have to understand what dissociation is in order to access it. And a dissociation that doesn't separate you from the person you're working with, but that you go through that together through an incremental process of experience of the field of relationship. And when you do that, and the healing symbols arise naturally, and then when you allow intuition to fully configure between the two of you, without being cognitive about it, you find that the direction opens itself up, and then you can start to go towards a proper solution. And you've avoided being hyper-rational, and you've avoided being pseudo-empathic or giving any of those core conditions of counselling out in that rote fashion. You're really there for someone, but there is an emotional cost for that, an energetic cost. So at a professional level, if you work with people who suffer in any respect, if you're going to go in depth, you have to do all of that. And if you do that with someone who has a divided anima, which is really what we're talking about today, then of course that division is manifest at every level, every superposition level of that person's being about relating. So it's not just that the mother perhaps has had a role, perhaps, in splitting the young man on the inside to do with his sense of confirmed identity as a young man, and for the mother to model the femininity. It's not only that, it means his action in the world is divided when he tests his self-concept against meeting people at adaptive stages of life. And then when he comes to see a therapist, those divisions are all constellated. So you have to reach deep inside the field of that person and find the right way of intuitively, not directing them, but intuitively helping them to access and draw through the healing symbolism that is then felt at an intuitive level to be shared between you. And at that point, the right direction will emerge. But it is difficult because complexes, as I know you know very well, Mladen, through your training and through your work with people, complexes defend themselves. They generate all sorts of alibis, all sorts of distractions, including a distribution of symptoms. Now, as Pauline was talking about in one of the earlier videos, that metaphorically, when the decapitation occurs and cognition's gone, there's a tendency to somaticize. Now, that can happen, the decapitation metaphorically, through repression, because it's lost from consciousness, ego, psychological consciousness. But the information then transduces into the body, where it offers a reflection of itself back to cognition via a symbolic conversion, which then becomes established as a symptom that is physical. And the ego says, that's just physical. That's got nothing to do with anything else. This is just something else completely. So I can now forget about my cognition in the same way, or forget about the the physical origin, which is non-physical in origin, it's psychosomatic, in the same way that I'm now forgetting about my cognition. I'm saying I can't use it. What is that? I can't reach the physical symptom. So the split is there. That's internal relating. That is still the anima. So the compound field nature of all of these issues, we have to know how to receive. And what we receive is the libido, the life force that the other person gives off. So by their libido, we will know them. And much of that knowing is intuitive. It's not guesswork. A lot of people think intuition is guessing. It's not that at all. It's a kind of receptivity to the waveform of a person. So it's what they say, it's what they don't say. It's the physical symptoms they have, and it's ones they may not have, or that they used to have, and they've changed, and how they relate to you, and what emerges in you in response to how you receive the other. But that's both ways. But they will be receiving the field of you too. And again, in the context of personal development, as I said earlier, that's what we need to do for ourselves if we're going to follow that particular route. If we're going to work on ourselves, we need to be able to adopt a position which is objective about us, but without collapsing into cognition, which is too abstract. We need to feel into instincts, into non-verbal language, into symbols, into representations, and the dynamical relationships between those symbols and relationships. If we do that, then impressions will form, which are non-cognitive. It might be imageries, narratives, dreams, that kind of thing. But we need to be sensitive to that, receive those things, confirm receipt of them, try not to internally project a cognitive position over them, internal projection. Once we do that, then the psyche will begin to represent itself in the right way for it. And if it trusts the ego to receive it, then the healing process will begin from within and it will move to without. So it's the same issue fundamentally, whether it's personal development or clinical practice. And when we make an observation of a third party who may be going through these things, or we make an observation of ourselves, it's the same again. We have to go in ultimately to the collective psyche, into those universal patterns that keep repeating down the generations. So the street scene a long time ago would have been very different, and ultimately there would have been no street at all. It would have been a natural environment. The Paleolithic, and perhaps even earlier, when some of these things were laying down for some of our non-human primate ancestors that still lived in social groups, those highly conserved representations are passed on. So the imagery that we experience now contains the old imagery within and beneath the new. But the healing is likely to come from the conserved past and not the pressure of the immediate moment. But we do feel the pressure of the immediate moment consciously, without realizing that we're also feeling instinctive pressures. But making these observations in the right way is really important in how to solve the divide and anima, isn't it? It's a hell of a problem though clinically, isn't it, how that manifests itself?
Well, because of the complexity again that you've described, Steve, and the individual context always. But what you're offering for people really is actually a way for them to do this for themselves, even outside of the clinical setting, because the more that you can do for yourself, the better.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, the chances are, if you don't get a very good therapist, then you'll just become mired in more attachment through transference and projection, which is best avoided if at all possible. So if you can go the personal development path, it's far better.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a little bit of courage to do that, but I would define courage in this context as being the capacity to separate yourself off from anxiety. And by anxiety, I mean drive state. So I'm making a distinction between a drive and any emotion about that drive that forms downstream of the drive. A lot of people, naturally enough, make the mistake of interpreting anxiety as an emotion. That's because they seem to occur together. But the drive itself in its pure state is only a drive, and we feel that as pressure, which we then interpret emotionally, and then secondarily, even after that, we might put a cognitive understanding on it. But the drive itself has purpose, and that purpose is always adaptation. And maladaptation comes to how we interpret the drive. And that is so, so important. So in order to have the courage to deal with anxiety, we need to understand what it is. So things that get labeled social anxiety, a social phobia, that kind of thing. These are awful suggestions, because we're delivering a negative to a person and saying, self-categorize, self-identify like that. And then when you come to believe it, you will generalize that out, it will distribute itself, and every social situation becomes like the others. That's a complex by definition. That's the field of a complex. But if we can utilize cognition initially to realize objectively and to an extent abstract out what we're up against. So this is just drive pressure. What does the drive want from me? I don't need to make an affective and emotional interpretation and then attach myself to it, because that's a complex. But if I decide not to do that and allow an intuition to form, so I get beyond the drive's presentation, and we'll go somewhere. And how do we do that? Well, if we've received the drive and then we separate from attachment to it, the drive withdraws. So it's like a wave, and we can receive the wave and then follow it. We can go from whence it came. And when we do that, and if we do it in the right way, we'll find out what the origin of it was. And the origin of it is going to be something which is meta-instinctive. In other words, it will be scenario-based, this latent, innate, inherited, genomic and field-based anticipation of a possible scenario that we will meet, that will bring us into a state of maladaptation, will present itself as an image or as a narrative or as a dream. That's better than receiving any of those things as a symptom, either physical or psychosomatic, involving both the mind and also relationally externally. So when we follow that back in the right state, the right disconnected state from the drive state, but we follow it, then we're opening up a genuine communication with the non-ego, the so-called unconscious. That takes pressure away immediately.
Yeah, otherwise I think we allow ourselves to be labelled, as you're suggesting, Steve, with things like social anxiety. Yeah. And whoever makes that suggestion, and it could be literally anyone, but oftentimes it's some kind of healthcare professional, or counsellor might say that we have social anxiety. What they're doing in effect is confirming the complex. Yeah. Because the complex of course, will have an affective core to which ideas are attracted. So it will have the affective and the cognitive component tied up in it. And then for someone to say, well, yes, they, absolutely, you have anxiety because you have this horrendous affect that you're feeling and experiencing, and you're having all these awful thoughts that go with it, means that you're becoming more and more separated from intuition as ground state consciousness, which of course is how you become updated from within about what really needs to be done. So we have to resist that kind of influence, which is negative, really, because it will only ever confirm complexes. I know it can be hard, can't it? It can be hard from within an affective state to have somebody say, that's not where your attention should be, it should be somewhere else. It can be hard to let go of that, but actually, in effect, it's the complex that doesn't want you to let go of it. It's not you, it's not your ego as such. So again, I think bearing that in mind and not seeing the drive state as being something bad or something negative is very helpful. It's very reassuring, because that allows us to go with it, allows us to go beyond it and into intuition, which is where the solutions are to be found. So we have to avoid external influence and suggestion about those kinds of things, kind of labels that come with that, and that we almost accept, because it's apparently better to have a name for something than to not have a name for it. You know, the ego feels better about that. It feels reassured that somebody is telling us we have a particular thing, a particular disorder, and then it's like, well, at least I have a name for it. But actually you don't have a name for it at all.
No, you have an abstraction for it.
You do, yes.
Mladen.
Yeah, resonates so much. I mean, in my life, I've seen countless people in today's, especially. Just for context, I was watching the Freud BBC series, and I watched the entirety, and it was very, very interesting. Sadly, the upload wasn't that good. Some of the dialogues can't be heard, but it was nevertheless the impression of it, the general, you can get it. And at one point, someone said once he got older, like no one is suffering from hysteria anymore, and he says every age has its diseases. So for context here, the social anxiety and anxieties in general are definitely one of the diseases of today's age, and you can see that people identify with it. And as Pauline says, the complex is the one who's very eagerly receiving that suggestion to fortify itself, and then people basically cannot separate their identity, and a lot of their core being gets suppressed just to support the idea that they are socially and not well adapted, or have social anxiety or something. So I know, Steve, that you propose that especially in personal development, that you can ask, what can you give up without giving up yourself? And by doing that, you can, even if someone resists, you can still see the resistance, the strength of the complex, if they are still very attached. So it can be a good test to see the strength of those fortified positions that someone has taken. And on another note, while you were saying about anxiety itself, could we perhaps more in a simple way interpret them as just as warning signs of possible maladaptation, that is currently that the deeper part of us is not agreeing with the current state, and is issuing a message of a kind that some things are not well balanced and should be more attended to?
Yes, and because of superpositioning, it's very difficult sometimes to work out the running order of things, which is why I was laboring the point that anxiety and emotion are not the same. The anxiety is a drive state that comes first, and then the affect is part of the interpretation. The reason affect comes online like that is highly conserved in an evolutionary sense, because there are some conditions, obviously, within life where we have to make a very, very quick decision, or something decides it for us. And a quick way of doing that is to generate fear. And the fear response then is generally connected to anxiety as a drive state, as I say. But if we think in affective neuroscience terms, Jaak Panksepp's work, for example, seeking is something which is going to be very closely associated with anxiety, because seeking is the primary drive to go out into the world and meet needs and resolve them. So if seeking mobilizes us effectively or effectively, then we will meet the need that the seeking system is trying to direct itself towards. But if we don't do that, then seeking turns into urgency, and urgency becomes the characteristic that defines the drive state as what we normally call anxiety. So seeking is just motivation, and seeking and intuition we've experienced this in our work, haven't we, are pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, they
because
certainly go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand,
yeah.
Because intuition is also a form of pressure to complete a much bigger scenario or situation than ordinary seeking would do. Because ordinary seeking, as it's so highly conserved from primitive organisms, primitive species, that it meets immediate biological needs. But intuition is concerned with higher order ones and whole system scenarios, and also finding solutions that ordinary drive states can't find for themselves. So it's a complementary process and it has its own pressure. And if you get intuition and seeking working together, then the drive state is high. And then if the ego personality can't sort it, then the affect kicks in as a form of urgency. Cognition cannot understand affect. If we collapse into cognition, they're very, very different states from one another. So in that sense, then the cognition starts to collapse, and then the anxiety builds up even more to try and push past the inertia of cognition, and the whole thing gets worse. But if we relate to it properly, and that's the key, because relating to it properly means, in effect, you are using your Jungian anima properly. I am relating on the inside to that which is not me, the ego. This is the wider field of me. I am receiving and therefore relating to it. That means the anima's working. When the anima's not working, then we're very often, as men, in a state of high anxiety about all sorts of instinctive issues that Freud would understand. And that would include relating, mating and relating, and the status, Adler, to do with our social position. Freud seeks Adler, Adler conceals Freud. All of these things become applicable at that point where we understand that we are superpositioned into several states simultaneously. The relating function is the key. How do we handle that? Well, how have we been trained to use it? That's relational in and of itself, because we need to receive examples of what relating is that confirm us and set boundaries for us. And as you know, principally that's for a young man, in fact, for both biological sectors, that comes from the mother. The mother's example of giving birth for a second time to us, but this time not to us just biologically, but to our ego as it emerges out from the unconscious, defines how we learn to trust the non-ego. And that then gives us the foundation to be born for the third time when we leave the mouth of the cave out into the world. So relating is the key to everything. And how that configures for us is how we meet our potential partners in the world. Hence the anima is superpositioned in every state it has ever occupied before. Every interpretation that it has ever made is latently there, and we bring representations of that through for us. The mother carries some of that. Other significant women that we have met in our life carry some of that, whether they're school teachers, figures of authority, extended family, or just chance meetings where later meta-instinctive levels of relationship are rehearsed in children, pre-puberty. You know, they're kind of getting to know the strangeness, if you're a man or a male child, male young person, of women and the feminine. And the result of that, of course, is that it gets turned mythopoetically into the kind of things that the Jungians talk about. The qualities that they ascribe to their understanding of what the anima is has all of these developmental impressions within it. And that's another problem for men when they're exposed to Jungian ideas, is that every one of those impressions, developmental impressions, then gets attracted to an apparent explanation of them. But the explanation brings them online, it reboots them all at the same time into these symbols, which then act as if separate to the ego. And but they're not, and separate externally, but they're actually operating in the same way internally, separate from connection to the ego, but they are systematized. And there you have your anima complex as it functions and as it's superpositioned from within to without. And that's the kind of configuration that we meet clinically and any of us will meet in terms of personal development when it comes to relating. So to have a divided anima then essentially means that. It means that when we meet relationships in the world, fully formed adult ones, with all the anticipations that have come through from biology and have been rehearsed in us at lifespan development stages on timed release from the genome, then anything that we've gotten wrong is likely to appear again. And that includes things we've not learned properly about how to make an assessment of relationships, so we don't become victims to, as men in this context, to destructive in this context women. And also we might mess things up really well by meeting a really nice girl, someone we should be in relationship to, but our mother's still there on our shoulder and whispering in our metaphorical ear and bringing all of those adaptive complexes forward. And then our prospective partner, who could have been our soulmate, thinks, oh no, this is too much. I can't deal with this. I want to relate to the man, not the child, not the mother-possessed child who's never really gone through that third birth out of the mouth of the cave. And as Paul was saying earlier, weren't you, about the rivalry then between the external woman and the mother complex.
Yeah.
And the mother complex with the real mother being present at the same time demonstrates the superpositioning. So the young woman can experience the man being in the state of possession, as the Jungians talk of it, of a mother complex, and the physical mother's there as well. There's the superpositioning internal and external, and the triangulation that you were mentioning earlier. But all of this can be solved if we approach it in the right way. And I appreciate a lot of what we've said is technical, but if it's broken down, the means to deal with all of this is in what we've said. The practical means. It'll need a little bit more fine-tuning for proper delivery for people, but it's there. And you can avoid a great deal of blind alleys and misdirections from internet gurus and through the misunderstanding of Jung's model if you can get down to those essentials.
Very nice. Yeah. On an earlier part, I didn't get a chance to comment on that. It will be a short one, I guess, but the picture that you presented, it shows the mother at a first glance, even though her look and demeanor is in a very caring way. The negative side of that can definitely be all the things that you were saying. Yeah, if she's too controlling, even her care instincts can become a victim for her complexes or some pathologies of her own, or maybe Adlerian issues that even though she presents in a caring way, she's really keeping the son trapped under her influence there. So
yeah, I mean that's such a good point, Mladen, because it's a fine line, isn't it, between caring and possession, and that intense kind of concern that the image of the mother in the picture appears to have can sometimes feel. I mean, I can feel as if that is too much, and then this is just a representation. It's not a real scenario as such, but the intensity of her gaze is it feels too intense. It feels as if she is way too attached, and the suggestion is probably that is the case given the way that this has been put together. So what, as you rightly say, why is that? Well, what is it in the mother that means that she feels she has to remain so attached to her son in that way? Because while she's attached, her life is on hold as well. Well, whatever that means for her and in the way of her own potential to develop herself at the stage of life that she finds herself in. So no one is free in that scenario. It's really we should be a mother looking at that and reading it in that way should actually be repulsed by that herself. She should feel somehow that investment of care and attention is wildly inappropriate for the stage of life that that young man is at. And
Yeah,
clearly some mothers do not back off. They continue to be attached in that way for all sorts of reasons. And it's such an unhealthy scenario
yeah,
for all concerned.
definitely. Yeah. I mean, it could be for the mother, perhaps some individuation issue that she
Yes.
cannot go forth in her own life, and she needs to remain in the role that she's familiar with.
Yes.
And there that would yeah, that's interesting. I might be wrong here, but would that constitute a transference from the parent to the child, actually?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. And the extent to which any individual woman or mother is aware of that will, to some extent, determine the outcome, because some women, some mothers, some older women will hang on for dear life, even if these things are pointed out to them. They just, literally and metaphorically will not let go. You can look at that and that image, and I mean, I certainly feel if I was in conversation with that woman, I'd want to say, for God's sake, leave him alone. Just get out of his life and go and develop yourself. Do something with your own life. Let him live his own. Let him make his own choices. And that's my own instinct. And I'm just looking at an image. It's not like it's even a real scenario as such. But my instinct would be to say, for God's sake, step away. Leave him alone. Get out of his life. Let him live his own life.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. He may have a reciprocal attachment, and it could, in theory, and in fact, sometimes be even stronger than the mother's towards him. And the attachment of a child to a parent, if the child doesn't wean themselves off from the parents, so to speak, can actually condition the parent to reciprocally over-attach back.
True.
So, which is a further complication. So it might not actually be so much 100% her fault. It may be 40% her fault and 60% in the young man. It just depends. And as you say, it is just an image, but it's an image which contains so many starting off points, really, to understand the field, which is why I was saying earlier that the most important thing of all is to receive the presenting field of the other. When we're working clinically, and when we're working on ourselves individually, we've got to receive our own field. And that's difficult, because you've got to hack your way through all of the fictions, the Adlerian guiding fictions, neurotic alibis that we've accrued ourselves through our ego's attempt to generate our own capacity to deal with the world. That's what Adler meant, really, about the power complex or feelings of inferiority. It's something that we build up where we attempt to compensate for something that occurs earlier on. So if he's had difficulty in meeting with the world as a young man, he may attach a parent to him. So it's just a consideration amongst all the others.
It's an important consideration, and it can and does happen. I guess the temptation is to emphasize that which is really evocative in that image, and for me anyway, obviously it'll be different for everybody looking at it. The thing that stands out for me is what appears to be an exaggerated sense of concern in the mother. I mean, it may be that it is well intentioned, and there's good reason for it, but I mean, if she literally and metaphorically lets him go out into the world, and he makes mistakes, which inevitably he will, then my perspective on that would be that the role of the mother is to be there for later, should that happen, should there need to be some guidance, some redirection, some emotional support, whatever. Because otherwise, that young man, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, actually, Steve, and it's not the fault of the young men who were in this situation. But if that was a Paleolithic context and that young man was at the mouth of the cave waiting to go out, and there was some, you know, cave lions waiting for him, what we don't want is a scenario where he steps out and he is immediately taken up by the cave lion, because he's so unprepared for the outside world. He's so still within the maternal cave that he can't actually make that adaptation without coming to some, you know, horrendous harm or sticky end or whatever you want to call it. So he has to, there has to almost be, I think, a kind of a belief in the mother that he will be okay even if she has some reservations, that she should at least allow him the opportunity to go and do that. And obviously, hopefully it won't be bad, it won't be a negative experience, but it's equally as bad, isn't it, to be trapped within the cave, the maternal cave, as it is to go out and for maybe not life to knock you around a little bit. I mean, but neither scenario is nice, but it still nonetheless seems preferable to leave the cave than it does to be hovering on the edge of it, still tied or attached to the mother, for a young man, that is.
Yeah, it is. And it's easier now to not be faced with the immediate consequences of making the wrong choices at the mouth of the cave, because we have a kind of extended adolescence, if not an extended childhood, and all sorts of apparent buffers that are built in to smooth the transition, but they are potential traps as well. Which is one reason I think why mythology has developed the way that it has, because mythology has layers of complexity that include fairy tales, for example, which are often much more to the point than myth. But the complexity is still there. But it's as if, as culture and civilization has evolved, then our understanding of the representations of these tasks of adaptation have also proliferated. That's good if we can sort out which ones we should pay attention to and which ones we should ignore. But the opposite, or the obverse side of that, is that the predatory nature or predatory side of human nature also has its mythic representations, and they fall back on Darwin and Freud and Adler to an extent. So if, for the sake of illustration, the woman on the left with the dark hair is the predator, then she's assessing the situation with the mother up very differently. It doesn't mean that the blonde-haired girl hasn't understood that the mother's a problem. It's just that either of them will potentially either have to exploit or to deal with the issue of attachment between the mother and the son differently towards a different goal. So the predatory woman doesn't really care. It's immediate gratification and then disposal. Whereas the other woman will be interested in making a decision on, do I invest my life in this man? Do I want to reproduce with him? Do I think I can save him from his attachment to his mother? Will he choose me because I am going to be better for him? Or will he go to the dark-haired woman who isn't bothered, apparently, because it's only short-term gratification she wants, and then he'll be dumped? And of course, inside the psyche of the young man, consciously to the ego or otherwise, an understanding of both of those scenarios and others also exists latently as meta-instinctive representations, because his ancestors have experienced this before in a sufficiently similar way for those meta-instincts to mobilize themselves in the form of a drive state, which he will feel as anxiety, but he has to interpret the anxiety properly in order to understand the meta-instinct. If not, then what tends to happen is that the system collapses around an easy option to reduce the drive pressure. And it'll be, I'll go with the dark-haired girl, and we'll just do what we have to do, and then there'll be another one tomorrow. Or I can't face this. The blonde-haired girl's too much for me. I am not prepared. I am unprepared, in other words, to form a proper lifelong relationship with someone who could challenge the relationship I have with my mother and bring out the positive in me. So it's far better to go and play an internet game instead, or go and hang around with my male peer group, take drugs, decide not to, relate, go and watch internet gurus, whatever it might be. In other words, the avoidance of adaptation.
So given these are all potential scenarios that a young man can meet and does meet going out into the world, who would you say, with respect to the mother and the father, is the most ideally suited to prepare him for that, in terms of having an understanding of what it is he's likely to meet?
Well, I would say ideally it would be the masculine, and that will include the father, but the father has to know when to let go of the son's sense of being constrained by him. So in other words, the young man needs to be handed over to mentors who replace the father within society, but even before that, to a peer group that will confirm him and say, we are at the same stage of lifespan development. This is a journey we can share together. Now, if that works, that's great. But of course, there are many ways that it will not work, some of the time at least, because peer groups can be very reductive and catabolizing and have Darwinian dynamics operating for competition between them. Women dial each other down, men do as well. You see this all the time with young men in a peer group. One of them forms a relationship and he's outgrouped. He loses all of his friends because the other friends aren't in a relationship except with themselves through the peer group. So at that point, the peer group is maladaptive. All of these pressures are occurring. So there has to be a meta-representative or representation, and there is within the psyche, of what the masculine is itself. And as that unfolds through lifespan development, that's the origin of a lot of hero myth representations, so-called hero cycle. I would avoid the hero cycle as defined by Joseph Campbell, for example, though, having said that, because that's far too collapsed into a mechanistic and rote cultural understanding of a very flexible internal model that is learned by experience directly across many hundreds of generations for many thousands of years. So go on the inside to receive rather than go out to any kind of representation that would collapse you if you're going to...
Including parental ones?
No, I'm going to come back. I'm going to segue back to that, because it depends on the quality of your relationship to your father, because you can restore what was lost when you're older. It depends on the quality of the father. A good father will know to let go of his son so other adult men can influence him positively. But if he's a good father, he will be in the background and will be introducing some of these figures or some of these opportunities. He'll also release his son to the peer group without too much influence, and understand that even for Freudian reasons, for Oedipal reasons of attachment to the mother, he has to step to one side and allow bigger representations of the masculine in the form of the superego or superego for Freud, when that works properly, to begin to give a representation of ethical practice, of a set of values and so forth. And the father's image is still there, but it's wider and it's more collective. And then later, the father needs to be there again if he is needed, as you said about the mother, in exactly the same way.
Yes.
But we don't really know from this image, unless we project into it, of course, which we are doing to some extent. Where is the father? Is he still alive? Is he still married? Does he, do you live in the same house? Was he ever a presence for this young man? But ideally, he will be there. And the best way to do that for a father as the son gets older is to be a point not of dictated wisdom, but of gentle statements of understanding at an intuitive and an instinctive level that are handed over to the son, as I say, in a calm way that does not generate resistance, inertia, anxiety, or whatever, but the son feels it. And that can happen in a few minutes if it's done properly. But if the father starts to lecture the son, if he starts to criticize him, anything like that, then you're going to damage the relationship you have with your son, and you're not going to be able to act as the medium for bringing through meta instincts that the son will need at that moment. For the father to do that, he has to have some distance based on respect for his son's lifespan development. Otherwise, he'll be interfering. And if he's had problems with his wife, the mother of his son, and there have been competitive point scoring going on over the years, over the relationships of the son, it will be difficult for the father to do that. So ideally, a good father needs a good mother also to be available to help the son. But the collective representation of the masculine that's latent within us is what we need to receive. And sometimes we need an external referent for that to allow it to bypass the ego and our complexes. Because we all have a father complex, for example. And that will always be there for adaptive purposes. The reason we have a father complex is that some fathers are inadequate, and we have to learn that they are, and we have to learn to be independent from them. So having a father complex is not abnormal. It's just an unfortunate aspects of evolution that they form naturally. So for a father to get around the father complex, he must not meet it in the way that the complex would expect the father to be. So he acts like a mentor, he's calm, he's respectful, he's understanding, he's brief, but he's available. That's the best way to do it.
And that's a man with a good anima.
Yes.
It's a description of a man who relates well to his anima. If he can do those things for his son, then his own anima's own relating function is in good shape.
I'd agree with that. Because he will be attuned to his son's needs rather than his own. And he'll know when to step gently away. And that's how a psychopomp should work. And psychopomps we can meet who are not related to us. We can meet them and they have no social status. They can be very ordinary people, but they have a wealth of experience. In Tantric Buddhism, they're considered to be crazy wisdom teachers. They're not necessarily Buddhists at all, but they've got some ability, that's some way of representing themselves and representing wisdom that is special to them in that moment, and it's meaningful. And the good psychopomp goes into an altered state of consciousness when they relate to someone, and then they move away and they're ordinary again. They're no longer crazy. They don't have that crazy wisdom characteristic about them. In some senses, a father has to do that for his son as well. But he is always going to have to negotiate the potential for the father complex, to be constellated, particularly in an adult son who is feeling that he's not coping. So the father has to give him the representation whereby he feels respected, supported, but not contained or directed to the father's needs. And I think, like you say, that's probably the description of a good adult male anima at work.
Yeah.
It'd be a similar configuration for the woman too. But this young man at this age is going through lifespan development phases, which he is being pressured from his genome and its related fields to enter into a competitive situation, a competitive scenario. Yeah. And if he feels unprepared, he will make mistakes.
So I say, like we've discussed then, just for illustrative purposes, a father, as we described in an earlier video, one who says to his adult son that you'll never find a woman like your mother. I mean, that could, or a good woman like your mother, or the suggestion is that he just won't be able to do that. And we put that, say, into this scenario here. I mean, it could go, I say, one of two ways at least. It could mean that he then tries to prove his father wrong, or to stand up to his father by going for the apparently more positive Anima representation here, because she is similar enough to his mother for him to then be able to say to his father, well, actually, you're wrong here, because I've been able to find a relationship that equals yours, or whatever you believe yours to be in your own eyes. Or he could be pushed more in the direction of the dark-haired woman, who would maybe lead him into a more sort of promiscuous situation that doesn't really result in any kind of longer term relationship, because maybe in parties, as I think you were suggesting, the young man fears that kind of situation where he has to commit to a woman, an external woman, long term, but also that other woman might offer him, there's a sense in which that relationship with the dark-haired woman would be more edgy, maybe a little bit more exciting, take him into experiences that he hasn't had before, and therefore, and also contradict his father's values about how a young man should be and conduct himself, and the kind of relationships he should have. So just that one experience, that one configuration in and of itself could play out in a number of ways.
It could. Yeah.
And again, this is what we mean when we say about the complexity of these things. Yeah. You never really know just how it is all going to pan out.
No, you don't. And that's a hugely important point, obviously. So there's a Darwinian imperative, which where all else fails, it's as if instincts coalesce around that, and then the drive pressure emerges out from it, which is, in the face of complexity, becomes simple. And in engagement with that simplicity, fulfill only Darwin, because at least you'll reproduce. That's very fundamental. That's a selective pressure that's been right back in our ancestry. And it is that way for all animals. And we are. And knowing that, though, allows us to be more human. And the ability to make choices, the burden of making them as well, that's important. And again, this is where myth comes from. These are collective representations of solutions, but also problems that have been experienced before. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of ways of dealing with it that are important. What do you think, Mladen?
Yeah, it's interesting that you also introduced the father, even though he's not here in the picture, because he might offer some stability to the situation, or if he was also not a good figure, then it's a double whammy for the young guy here. Yeah. So yeah, but we are on the mother here, specifically interested in her in this video, and in a part of this, Pauline, you were mentioning how the best progression for her is to carry on with her life and have a positive role in a way that she should release the son into the outer world and continue on with her own development. And I'm interested in how could it pan out that if the mother is, I mean, I've seen this in my life, that's why I'm asking. Yeah. If the mother is under strong instinctive pressure to do so, and is not very conscious of it, so that she can, in a more gentle way, confirm the son's place in the outer world, or give him symbolically the father, or confirm him in a way how he should relate to other women. And if she's under such an instinctive pressure and she's not able to do it in a gentle and confirming way, basically kicks the son out of the house. So even though she is accomplishing the separation, it's done in a very aggressive way, and I'm interested how that could pan out in this scenario, for example.
Oh, that's such a good question. It seems cruel, doesn't it? The way that you've painted that seems like an extreme way of dealing with something that needs to happen. Clearly, it does need to happen. but to do it by literally throwing, her son, the young man, out of the house, it may be the push he needs. Whether that's the best way of tackling it is, I guess, another matter. There's probably kinder ways of doing that, but again, it's so dependent on context, isn't it, Steve? Yeah. I mean, I would personally find the idea of doing that as it feels too extreme, but it just depends what the situation requires. And if it is a case that nothing will happen positively for that young man in terms of his finding his masculinity and finding his place in the world, if that has to happen for that to happen, then arguably that's preferable than him still being stuck with a, decades later, which can happen. So it made me think of oh gosh, back sort of into classical times, some of the ways that mothers were expected to deal with their sons. I'm trying to think of the name of that film. It's not going to come to me, unfortunately. Where mothers, young men, sort of when they reach puberty, they were torn from their mothers. There is a myth behind it. I can't think of what it is right now.
That's,
you know the one I mean. But that idea of literally a forced, almost a violent separation from the women.
A number of
there's probably a number, isn't there,
classical
cultures that have entered into that, and that's a very extreme way of dealing with it. But I think it's relevant to the point that you made, Mladen, that how do women manage? How do mothers manage this process with their sons, particularly, say, if the father's not really very involved in their lives? He's either physically absent or just absent in the sense that he's not an influence, maybe not even positively or negatively, may just be there but be inert.
Yeah.
So I guess in that extreme scenario, I think it is preferable to bonding him, literally physically, because the act of throwing him out is almost a symbolic act, isn't it? It suggests more than it may appear. It's one thing in maybe not having a roof over his head, but it's what else that means as well at other levels. So I don't know, what would you say on that, Steve? Do you feel that it's that would be a kind of a cold sort of cutthroat way for a mother to deal with her son, or can you see a context in which that would actually be justifiable?
Well, I think the only context it's justifiable unto itself, again, would be a Paleolithic one. So that's what we're dealing with all the time, when imagery like that through frustration may emerge in someone. It's going to be highly conserved, so it'll have a lot of pressure. And then if we're lucky, the more evolved parts of our mind will say, okay, I've entertained the thought and the fantasy, but it's gone. Now I'll be more conserved about doing the right thing. But in a Paleolithic environment, where every mouth is a resource or is taking resources, if someone is not adapted, they're going to be overlooked or left out, thrown out the cave maybe. Now, having said that, I have experienced plenty of parents who've done that, both in my former or original career as a police officer, where that kind of thing has led to all sorts of issues, where there's been abuse of children, where they've been murdered, or whether the children have just gone on to become criminals as a form of adaptation. So it's still there as a response, but decent people won't do it. They'll think about it, they'll feel something, but they won't do it. It just depends, doesn't it? I think a middle ground might be where, for the good of the son, that a parent might withdraw 100% of their support and encourage them to go. That then should meet the instinctive drive pressure of the child, say the son wanting his own home and wanting to leave, wanting to go out to carve a reputation for himself and what have you. So it's complicated, isn't it?
It is complicated.
It's all scenario specific.
It is. I think sometimes what you can get is that the son, because obviously he is arguably attached to the mother in a specific way, that he might actually then engineer a scenario, a transference, if you like, that provokes the mother into rejecting him. I mean, that can happen. It can happen with the father as well, of course. But it's, you know, if the drive pressure is sufficient, which I think is what you're saying, the instinctive drive pressure to get out, and he's maybe a very decent young man, maybe too decent, to the extent that he doesn't feel he can outrightly say something to the mother or even to the father, if the father's anima is controlling, that he might then simply engineer a situation, a transferential situation, where the mother's instincts just can't stand it anymore. And he brings that out in her. And as a result of that, she does and says maybe some very terrible things that she later regrets, because the instinct to make him stop and to send him on his way is so great that she goes along with it. But I guess that we hope, don't we, in a sort of a civilized society, that there will be some negotiation between the ego and instinct, and they'll come to some kind of agreement that is reasonable about what needs to be done. But I think there are situations where that does happen. The mother is provoked and provoked and provoked into doing it, and then she can be blamed as well at the same time. And so it serves lots of purposes to do that.
And superposition with that, there are conflicting meta instincts, because meta instincts can disagree, because they have different goals. So you can get all of that going on, and then it's a very confused situation. And that actually is what we really mean by the divided anima, a confused situation about relating. What is the rank order of solutions I need to address over this? And very often we can't get it right because we can't please every part of the psyche. But there are fundamentals. The basic issue of relating internally and then relating externally, that gives you the best configuration to be able to deal with these things. And some of the things we said earlier about how to approach patients, how to approach ourselves, that's the groundwork that needs to be done.
I've remembered the name of the film now. Was that Sparta or Spartans? Was that the name of the actual title of the film? But it was to do with,
well, the Spartans did that.
The Spartans did do that.
They did. They did.
Yes.
So did the Carthaginians and others. But they're famous for it.
They are.
Or were, I should say.
Thanks to both of you for providing. I mean, it's a nuanced question. It's a difficult one, but when you bring context into consideration of the entire constellated family and their relationships between each other, themselves, their own personal instincts, and the whole group, I mean, it can even start to make sense of such a dramatic scene happening. And thank you also, Paul, for mentioning the father, that if he was absent, even though present, but still absent in his instinctive way, then the mother could be co-opted by the instincts to fulfill that role of pushing the son outside. Under I can imagine instinctive pressure, that it's not her job, and yet she has to do it. So
I mean,
double the difficulty there.
Absolutely, Mladen. I mean, that can happen in single parent scenarios, can't it? It could be what's happening in the image that we've all been sharing and looking at. It could be that the mother concerned has been forced to try and occupy both roles, and hasn't been able to do either adequately, and maybe through no fault of her own. But I do think the thing is that, you know, at a meta instinctual level, no matter how much a mother might try to be like a father, an absent father, whatever that means, it is ultimately impossible for her to fulfill that role in the way that it was intended and certainly anticipated by the son. So, I mean, a lot of women find themselves in that scenario, and no doubt they do their very, very best to deal with what is a very difficult and demanding situation, and it's nobody's fault as such, but nonetheless these dynamics inevitably play out in the way that they do, because they're not ideal. No. Meta instinctually, not for anybody.
No, that's the task of life, as Adler called it, really, which is basically working out your relationships to other people, and to your own sense of inferiority, as he called it. You know, I think that's an unfortunate statement on his part, really. But if you mix Adler appropriately with Jung, what Jung doesn't do is corrected for, because of Adler's emphasis on social adaptation in that everyday sense. And what compensates for both of them is Freud. How do you come to terms with biology and instinct? If that's not done properly, Adler doesn't work, and neither does Jung. So really, we need all three. And all three represent something which is innate in us anyway. So yeah, the best way to deal with the problem of a divided anima is to accept that it always will be. That there's no ultimate integration of it possible because of the complexity of life and lifespan development, but we can have a go at it. We can do as good a job as we can, because that is dynamic adaptation to things. And if we've made a mistake or a series of them in our lifespan developments, we can go back to the ancestral psyche to find out how to bring forward the cure for that. We don't have to go back to our complexes. If we handle it properly, we can bypass them. And that includes the scenario that was in that picture as well. So if we mess that up, provided it's not terminal, and how far we've messed it up, there is always the potential to reconfigure our lifespan developments appropriately.